Hello, and welcome to today's MER Sapient webinar titled Hindsight 2020, ECM Procurement, How to Get What You Need. My name is Lynn Williams with the MER Conference. We will begin this webinar in just a few moments. Please hold on the line. Good afternoon to those of you joining us from the eastern half of the country, and good morning to those of you joining us from the west. Welcome to today's MER Sapient webinar titled Hindsight 2020, ECM Procurement, How to Get What You Need. This is part 2 in a 4-part series brought to us by Access Sciences. My name is Lynn Williams, and I'm the speaker concierge with the MER Conference. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few bits of administration. Next slide, please. During today's webinar, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the GoToWebinar control panel. Press the question button and type in your question anytime during the webinar. Today's presenter will address your questions at the end. After the webinar, I invite you to take a short survey. This survey helps us to serve you better in future webinars. We appreciate your feedback. I'd like to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded. A link will be sent to you via email so that you can access this webinar at a later date or share it with a friend or a colleague who may not have been able to attend today. And everyone attending will receive an email with a certificate of attendance. Next slide. I'd like to invite you to attend the MER conference, which will be held via a virtual format this year, which we're very excited about. It'll be May 4 through 6. Continuing education credits will be available, and the entire conference is going to be recorded. So this will make it available to all registered attendees post-conference. So check out our MER conference website and join us for this virtual conference experience. And we also have a handout available here on the GoToWebinar control panel describing the conference further. Next slide. We'd like to thank our 2020 Sapient sponsor, Nixia, for making this year's webinars possible. Next slide. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Josh Quintero, Senior Consultant at Access Sciences. Josh, I turn it over to you now to start the webinar.
All right, well, thank you very much. And excuse me. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for spending some time with us today. Like was mentioned, my name is Josh Quintero, and I'm a Senior Consultant with Access Sciences. I've been with Access Sciences for about 6 years. And for the last 3.5, I've been primarily focused on content management requirements gathering. So a few months ago, when we decided to create this webinar series, we decided to title it Hindsight 2020. We did this to help emphasize that many companies are often unsatisfied with their project results, and they have to look back on lessons learned. So at Access Sciences, we wanted to share some of our lessons learned and best practices from all the projects that we've completed helping companies improve their information management landscapes. So just a couple quick disclaimers here before we get going. Like everyone, I'm sure on the call today, I'm talking to you guys from my office today. So that being said, I live just a few miles down from an Air Force base south of Houston. And periodically we get a Top Gun style F-16 flyby. So if you hear a little bit of jet noise, I apologize for that, but they don't listen to me when I ask for a no-fly zone. Also, one more thing is we might have some unregistered participants if the doorbell rings. Marlene, Harvey, and Yukon here generally don't care about the noise they make whenever I'm on a conference call. So You might hear a bark or two, but that's just them, I guess, cheering me on as we go. So now that we've gotten all these silly kind of disclaimers out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about what we're here for. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to discuss how we got here. You know, what got us to this point. Then we're going to discuss how software is procured now and the trouble areas that we've seen in projects. Then we're going to talk about the value of engaging the stakeholders, how to create some structure around the requirements gathering. We're going to discuss how to define the approach to the procurement process itself. We're going to discuss the creation of demo scripts that are specific to you and how you work. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the objective evaluation of these systems. So like it was mentioned, this is a series of webinars, 4-part series, this being the second one. And during the first one, we assessed the organization. Okay, so but now what? You know, what do we do with that information that we've garnered from that assessment? Well, if the assessment recommended that we needed a system to help with one issue or another, then you're probably going to want to go out and purchase a piece of software. And that, of course, is what we're talking about today. We're going to be peeling off another layer of IM onion, if you will, and dig a little bit deeper into details of what the organization actually needs. But before we get too far, I'd like to just throw up a quick poll and see what kind of issues you guys have encountered procuring software. So hopefully you guys see that poll. And you know, have the demo of the procurement that you've encountered, you know, have the software demos been useless? You know, once it's rolled out, have the systems not worked for all your departments? Have you encountered that terrible low user adoption, or have you not had any issues whatsoever? So to give you a little bit of time there to complete that.
Okay, Josh, it looks like the results are in. It looks like you have a 38% low user adoption rate. The next coming in at 32%. System didn't work for all departments. And then 24% useless software demos. And then we have a lovely 5% say they have no issues at all.
Well, wouldn't it be great to be in that no issue category? Well, so let's talk about the one that was the highest, the low user adoption. You know, this is a very troublesome aspect of these sorts of projects, and I'm probably going to guess that it's probably from not engaging the users from beginning to end. And of course, that's something that we're going to be discussing as we move along here. But yeah, that'd be great to be part of that no issues group. So another issue, it looks like the software demos were useless. That's probably because they weren't showing you how you worked, and that's another pretty large issue that we've seen with some of the demos. So we'll also talk about you know, these problems as we go along here. So the way that software is procured isn't anything that's new or groundbreaking. The need is identified in one way or another, whether it be a department comes to you and says, hey, we need something, or you get it from a consultant's report. Then you go out and you gather the requirements, you see some demo of software, and then you select the system, of course. But the majority of the blind spots that we've seen in support of these larger buckets, you know, there are, however, some best practices that we can help fill in some of these gaps and make the procurement process a whole lot easier and far more likely to succeed. So I've added these 4 tasks to the model here, and I've also renamed it as a stakeholder-centered procurement model. And as we move through the presentation here, you know, we'll sort of see why I named it stakeholder-centered. when you're looking back for lessons learned after you've completed a project, these 4 steps are going to be the most likely culprits of any sort of stumbling or possibly failure. The basic steps are still there, but you will see the sort of impact that having these 4 things added are going to create in the project. But the first thing we need to figure out is pretty much how did we get here. Like I mentioned before, there at some point there was a need for new software identified. And since this is part of a series that we've put together, we're going to go ahead and assume that it was from a assessment. From the first webinar, we've assessed the organization, and out of that came some results. What are those results, and how do they influence how we're going to, or why we're going to buy software? Well, the gap analysis could notice some gaps in departmental processes or in existing systems that a large overarching organizational-wide content management system could help close. The common themes could have seen some, some issues within departments that span multiple departments, and need to close those as well. And excuse me a little bit for my clearing of my throat. I've got a little bit of a cough going on. So now that we've seen what sent us down this road, let's go ahead and look at the procurement model again. We see that the stakeholder engagement is in fact the first box here. That's pretty much because it's one of the most important things here. This is going to set the stage for how the stakeholders view the procurement and how actively they participate. You're going to hear me say this multiple times, but this whole thing is about them. It's not about forcing them to use a system. It's about asking them, what the system needs to do in order to make their life better. And if it doesn't do that, then you're never going to get their support. Also, as we move through this, you're going to notice that for each of the tasks on this model, we're going to talk about the value and also the risk you'll encounter. And we also hear a story or two from previous projects. So what sort of value are we going to get from engaging the stakeholders? What can we expect? Well, we're going to be able to demonstrate the value of this effort. You have to tell people why they should come and meet with you for about an hour. What's in it for them? They have to be shown its value in their daily job. Otherwise, they're just not going to buy into it. After all, this is what this effort's all about. It's about them. It's going to help prioritize the initiative. These people, like all of us, have many things to do, and this is just one more that they have to add in. So hopefully, once you show them the value of this project, you're going to be able to get a little bit of their day. So you have to show them, again, what's in it for them. It's going to help you ensure that you get the right people in the room. Simply put, without these right people, you're just not going to give the information that you need, and you're going to have, a whole bunch of issues after that. It's going to help drive active participation. This is probably the second most important value, right behind ensuring that the right people come. Without this active participation, it's going to be just a bunch of people sitting in a room staring at each other and not saying anything. And I don't know how many people out there have encountered this, but I can tell you that it's pretty much the worst thing and is very, very not productive. So with active participation, the meetings are pretty dynamic, and they can be really entertaining and fun. One person will hear something that another says, and that'll spark their mind and lead them to mention something else that they might have forgotten otherwise. So the conversation sort of bounces around the room, back and forth onto different topics. So while this can wreak havoc on the person taking notes, it's very productive and very worthwhile when it happens. So by informing the stakeholders of the process early and engaging them throughout it, you can show them the value and really just gain their support. So we're going to look at this cat for just another second because it makes me laugh. Okay, moving along. So one of the best ways we've found to do this is to hold town hall style meetings. They're short town hall style meetings where we present what the project is, what their role is, and then what they also should expect. There's often a misconception about exactly what types of projects these are. The one thing that needs to be made perfectly clear is that it's not an audit. You're not there to question their value to the organization. Their value is exactly why they're being asked to come. So at the end of any presentation, you're going to ask questions. You're going to ask for questions, and hopefully you get quite a few, because this will help not only educate the entire audience, but also help ease any anxiety they might have. So as we can see, the value is pretty apparent, right? You can see why you need to do these things, but what really happens if you don't? Well, you get the wrong people in the seats. If you don't demonstrate why it's important to have the subject matter experts, the people that know what's going on there, you can often get people that are considered, air quotes, less critical. That somebody that just has time, perhaps. This is a big issue because you won't get what you need from the meeting, and that less critical person would have just wasted their time. You're going to have to deal with competing initiatives. As all of you are aware from looking at your own calendars every day, you have a lot of things to do, and every day it gets worse. So these competing priorities can drive this requirements gathering to the very back burner. So they have to know why it's important for them to be there. What's in it for them, yet again. You might have to do a lot of rework. This rework I'm talking about is from having the wrong people in the seats and having to deal with competing initiatives. Once you have that issue, you have to go back. You have to find out who the right people are. You have to contact them, wait for them to get back with you, check their calendars and yours to make sure that you can find a good time, and then hope they come and something else more important doesn't pop up. All of this can be avoided if you engage with them early and show them the value. So here's the story part of the conversation here. I was on a project where for several meetings, we didn't have the right person in the room. We would speak to them. They would always say, well, you need to talk to Jane for that. You need to talk to Bill for this. And so all the questions that we were asking, we just didn't get answers to. And this caused the exact same kind of rework that I was just describing. And while it isn't really a project killer, it does cost time, money, and can create the occasional headache for the person having to schedule all the meetings. So how you avoid this is pretty dependent on your organization, its size, and its culture. During one of our requirements projects, the records manager walked door to door, spoke to every manager she could, just to make sure that we had the right people in the room. Now, this wasn't a large organization, so it could be done this way. But the point of the story is that she put forth an effort, and this effort should be put forth regardless of the size of your organization. You should do whatever it is that your organization responds best to. Maybe that's email, maybe that's something on the intranet. Whatever it is that they respond best to. So once we've engaged these stakeholders, we need to go ahead and move to pretty much the meat of the conversation here, or one of my favorite parts, which is the requirements gathering. So during some research I was doing for another project, I found a statistic that said over half of the software projects fail as a result of improperly gathered requirements. So the importance of gathering requirements is often overlooked, but as we'll see here, it's essential to any software project success. And the approach that you take is more vital than you can possibly imagine. So not seeing the value of a comprehensive requirements gathering can leave the project kind of dead in the water. So what are these values here? Well, for one, you get a measuring stick. These requirements are going to serve as the bar at which you measure all the software that you're going to look at. You know, if a software doesn't meet your requirements, then it's something that you can, you know, just go ahead and push to the side and not have to spend any more time or effort on vetting. You get a grocery list of functionality. One of my favorite stories here is that, you know, the old saying about not going to the grocery store while you're hungry. And it pretty much applies to software procurement as well. I mean, I don't know how many of you have gone to the grocery store and ended up coming back with a couple boxes of cookies or a couple of pints or gallons of ice cream. But when you do, was it even on the list? You know, when you don't have a grocery list, you can end up buying too much because everything looks really good or really neat in the software world. And then sometimes you don't even get what you went to the store to buy to begin with. You're going to get user buy-in. You know, whenever you get this user buy-in, it goes from a, air quotes, just a system I use to this is my system because I had a hand in what was selected. And again, I'm going to keep harping on this, but the value of having project champions in the departments is absolutely priceless. You know, it's something that you can't pay people to do. And without requirements, you're going to risk overpromising, which can be a huge issue if the users are told they're going to get a piece of functionality, and then at some point they realize that they don't. And that at some point is usually during implementation, which is probably the worst time in the process that it could happen. And this is going to make people very weary and lose sort of confidence over the software itself. You can risk overbuying. So one of the reasons you want to be so careful with how these requirements are gathered is that nothing will lead you to overbuy as having too many requirements. You know, most of the systems have a whole lot of bells and a whole lot of whistles, especially the larger ones. And like any car, you know, bells and whistles are usually extra and often go unused. Another thing this does is it adds a lot of complexity to the implementation, which also increases the price of that. You risk underbuying, and without a comprehensive requirements list, some departments may be overlooked and their requirements may not be gathered. And so what can happen is during the implementation, when you roll out to these groups, it's noticed that now we need an extra module or we need to get some custom coded solution after the initial purchase. And I'm sure that everybody's aware that you always get a better deal whenever you bundle things together up front instead of having to go back and buy things a la carte. You get the lack of user buy-in that a lot of you had. You know, when systems are selected for you rather than with your input, you're going to get slow or possibly just no adoption whatsoever because it's not theirs, right? Not too long ago, we were asked to perform a review of a pilot project for an AP automation tool. This was a accounts payable invoice processing tool. And during that, it became pretty clear that the implementer hadn't gathered the requirements thoroughly enough and that the system had to be reconfigured multiple times in order for it to fit the user's needs. So this did two things. This pushed the timeline really far. I think it was around a year. And then it also increased the spend by half. You know, had these things been recognized during the requirements gathering phase, they would have gotten what they needed and not gotten a really bad taste in their mouth because of all the reconfiguration. And while it may seem like a big step backwards to go back and get those requirements, it's actually probably the quickest way forward and probably cheaper as well, since you don't have to worry about doing all this reconfiguration at the developer's cost. So to ensure that we get the requirements correct, we're going to look at some requirements 101. And when you're gathering requirements, you're more than just asking people what their requirements are for software. You know, you're not going into a meeting with a list of requirements and saying, okay, yes or no, next one, yes or no. You know, this is just not a good way to do this. And to keep this from happening, you're going to have to engage with a lot of people from a lot of the organization. Take this org chart, for example. Optimally, we would talk to corporate and as well as the Scranton branch. So it seems like a lot of people to talk to, perhaps, but you need to speak to enough people that you get a full representation of the enterprise or organization. If you only speak to a quarter or a half, that's just not going to be enough. You're just going to get a quarter or a half of their requirements. It's not uncommon for us to speak to 200 or more people in large organizations. While we were working at a government organization up in the Northwest a couple of years ago, we spoke to about 300 people during the requirements gathering phase. And whenever we first began speaking to their project team, they initially had 36 meetings because they had 36 departments. After we started doing a little bit of digging, a little bit of analysis, we realized that there was a whole lot of subgroups within these major departments. And so we ended up having 72 meetings to make sure that we had full coverage of their organization. This sort of helps to illustrate the types of things that you're going to have to think about when setting these projects up. Another thing is that, in order for you to make these meetings as efficient as possible so that you're making the best use of everyone's time, you need to have the right people there. The right people are those that are going to be familiar with their group's business processes. These are the ones that perform these processes daily. You need people that are intimately familiar with all the ins and outs and the whole process within their department. You need people that can explain who they collaborate with. We all work with people inside and outside our areas, and this person needs to be able to speak to how that occurs. They need to be able to describe what is working and what isn't. This is an important aspect of this requirements gathering, that you don't just focus on what isn't working. It's not just negative. You're not just looking for things that don't work. And you want people to be excited to tell you, well, this works great. So you need to be able to do that as well. And by the end of these meetings, you need to understand what the users need. That's the point of these meetings, right? And the most efficient way we found to do this is just talk to people about what they do and how they do it. Through these conversations, you're able to glean the requirements from what they say. You're not asking for their requirements, like I mentioned earlier. You're getting them from how they do their job. Most people are going to give you a deer in the headlights look if you ask them what their requirements were for software. I know a while back I would have. You talk to them about the documents they create, who they collaborate with inside and outside their organizations or departments, how they do that, what are the tools or systems they use. You don't, like I mentioned before, you don't concentrate just on what doesn't work. You need to know what works well so that you can see what's working and maybe replicate that in another area of the organization. So what you're likely to find is that an issue that has been the bane of someone's existence has often been solved by someone in another department. To illustrate this, during a project last year, we spoke to a department that had a process for collaborating on documentation with an offsite facility using their share drives. The next day, we were talking to an HR representative from another group, and she had a similar process where she was collaborating with that offsite facility, but on HR documents, and she hadn't had anything built around it. So she was having to deal with emailing stuff back and forth, a lot of versions and that sort of thing, and having to find, which one was the newest one. So we told her, what the other group had done, and she was just over the moon about it. It was going to make her life so much easier. And even though that's not what we were there to do, we were there to collect the requirements for a system. It's that sort of knowledge sharing that is what you get from not just focusing on what was wrong. She went back to the department and just sang our praises about how great it was, what the project was doing, how helpful we were, and all that sort of thing. And again, that's not something you can put a price on. So you've gathered all the requirements, you've engaged the stakeholders, but what does the requirements document look like? The requirements document looks similar to this. It is obviously much longer than this one, but it's similar to this. We try to mold the requirements to what makes the most sense for the organization that we're working with, but usually they're ordered by basic functionality like content management in this example. So this document includes both directly mentioned requirements and then requirements that aren't specifically mentioned, but they're needed to support another one. If there's a requirement that that they have little sub requirements in order to make things work, that's sort of the things that we're talking about here. And depending on the type and size of the organization, we usually gather about 150 to roughly 200 requirements. When you get much higher than that, you start having to determine what is really a requirement and what's just something that's nice to have. And unfortunately, this involves a lot of internal discussion and waiting and requirements waiting. So what you're going to find there is that people often have very different views of what actually is a requirement. It's very, very personal and very how they work. So there are going to be some pretty large decisions here that need to be made once that final requirements list is created. One of the big questions that you're going to hear is any one system, can it fulfill all of the requirements? This is another issue of having too many. If you have 600 requirements, is there any one system that's going to fulfill them all? Probably not. And that's where this weighting document comes in handy. It enables you to tabulate the decisions, and it causes the true requirements to sort of bubble up to the top. And in order to keep the requirements list from getting out of hand, we don't add requirements that are standard for all the systems. You wouldn't want to add a requirement that the system be able to store PDF, Excel, and Word file types, because that's basically what they were designed to do. That's the core function of these systems. So we don't add these to the requirements listing, so it doesn't muddy the water. The requirements document helps you make an informed decision about what you're going to purchase, regardless of the procurement route that you're going to take. So the reason that we spoke so much about the requirements is that they're going to lay the groundwork for the entire project's success. When people are looking to buy something, we all have different styles about how we do it. Generally, but we generally want to know what we need before we go out and get it. And companies and organizations are very much the same. While very often software is acquired through a formal RFP process, it's not the only way that we see software being acquired. And before we talk about the rest of the process, just want to quickly highlight a few ways that we see organizations being introduced to this purchasing process. We see organizations that, for one reason or another, have software suggested to them. We've had clients come to us and say, we just got acquired, or we have a sister organization that is suggesting that we use this piece of software, but we really don't know if it fits our needs. So we need this. We need to see what's going on here. We've had organizations come to us and say that they have old software. They look at their software and say, this software is 10 years old and it really doesn't fit with what we do, but we are about 3 or 4 updates behind, and we'd like to see if that one really will fit our needs if we get the update. Do we really want to spend that time and effort updating it if it's not going to do us any good? Finally, you may have more of an informal RFP process. Someone may ask you to go get 3 vendors and have them give you bids. You really don't want to go through an entire formal RFP process, even though that is a very valid and oftentimes used way. But you just may not have the time or want to put forth the effort that it takes to sort through 15, 20 responses and then having to develop a short list of all those. So the major key here that I wanted to share is that it's not as important which one of those paths you take, since they all can lead you to success. The key at this point is that you know what you need. You've defined the requirements and you're ready to move to these next steps. these next steps are what are going to lead you to succeed regardless of this process, regardless of the process you've chosen. So the number one thing that this whole process is trying to do, level the playing field. Every step along the way here is performed in a manner to do exactly that. All the vendors bid on the same scope of work. They're all asked to provide pricing in the same manner. They respond to the same set of requirements in the standard format. They use the same demo script that we'll talk about in a second, and all the evaluations are scored in the same way. All of this is so at the end, you have this apples to apples comparison. So this will make the lives of the people selecting the system a whole lot easier. And as mentioned a second ago, we're going to see how we can level the playing field even further with these creations of demo scripts that are specific to your organization. So as part of creating them, you need to cover as much of the organization as possible without unnecessarily burdening the software vendors. So it's a good idea to go ahead and select processes that are both common across the organization and those that are specific to certain areas, but whose requirements will sort of test that software. It's kind of hard to make specific examples here since a lot of organizations have small systems that handle a lot of things, like say processing invoices, that sort of thing. But you want to pick processes that everyone can relate to. Maybe it's an approval process that everybody can relate to needing something approved. The scripts will have to be written in a system agnostic manner. Basically, all that means is that they aren't system specific. Any vendor can come, look at the script, and then use their system to create their demo. So before we talk about the script itself, let's see what kind of answers we get to this question. How valuable have you found demos to be? Did you see what you needed to see? Were they very valuable? Were they somewhat valuable? They didn't quite show you everything. Were they not valuable at all? They didn't show you at all what you needed, or have you not seen any?
Okay, Josh, the results are coming in. It looks like 69% of the people responded somewhat valuable, which is great. 23% said very valuable, 6% I haven't seen any, and 3% not valuable.
Okay, that's pretty interesting that so many thought that they were very valuable. That's great. But as far as the somewhat valuable folks, we're going to be looking at things that, and also for the very valuable folks, we're going to be looking at things later on here as we go along. They're going to show you how to make these demos better. If you have these demo scripts written well, it's going to do exactly that. They're going to be extremely valuable in the end. So let's see how exactly we can make these, we can upgrade the not valuable group to the very valuable group. There it goes. So software vendors spend a lot of time and a lot of effort creating their standard demos. These are extremely practiced, and they highlight the strengths and kind of minimize the weaknesses of the software, not in a malicious manner, but just in a way that makes everything look great. And there's a time and a place for that. The place like conferences, events, or even webinars like this one. But the time and place is not whenever you're trying to see if that software demo or if that software is going to work specifically for you. And that's sort of probably why they weren't valuable at all. They didn't show you how you worked. So having this well-written demo script sort of takes them out of that normal demo and makes them show you how the system really operates. So the values that you're going to get from creating these demo scripts that are specific to you, you're going to get demo scripts that are written with user input. You're going to get demos that show you how you work. And we're going to level the playing field between the vendors. So for the next couple slides here, we're going to talk about each one of those in a little bit more detail. Demo scripts aren't created in a vacuum. They're a large collaborative effort between the person creating them and the users. So during the requirements gathering, you're going to uncover some processes during that, and you're going to document them at a high level. And using these as a base, you can kind of create the demonstration that I mentioned a little bit ago that target both enterprise-wide and specific department requirements. These scripts are then sent to the users, they're adjusted with their user input, and then sent back to them for approval. So you can see again how we're sort of weaving the user's input through this entire thing. And because of this collaboration, you're going to see demos that show you exactly how you work. You know, not all organizations perform the same type of work in the same manner. So it's important to see exactly how you work in the demo. You know, is it going to make your life easier? Is it going to create new unknown problems that you're going to have to deal with? You know, if it creates new problems, you know, you really want to find that out in the beginning and not after you spent a whole lot of money purchasing a piece of software. So like I discussed earlier with leveling the playing field, you know, the standard demos that the vendors are going to give are going to be very likely to be quite different. You know, each software usually has some sort of niche that it lives in and that it performs best in. So of course, the software vendors are going to show you that. You know, software A vendor may demonstrate how it handles AP invoices. The software vendor B may show you how it processes engineering documents. And clearly you can't compare these because they're not apples to apples. And is one of the exact reasons that the playing field needs to be leveled. You know, all the vendors need to be playing the same game and not wildly different ones. You know, you can't tell if a person is good at baseball by watching them play football. You know, it's just not an easy thing to do. And this is basically what would be happening if you were trying to figure out if a demo for AP would work on how you process your engineering documents. So by creating these demo scripts, you're going to help mitigate the misrepresentation of software capabilities. You know, there might be some behind the scenes magic from a standard demo that really doesn't represent what the software can do. While we were working at a client in the Midwest not too long ago on a completely separate project, the client that we were working with saw a demo of an ECM system. The vendor demoed an integration that was supposed to be seamless between the users, what the users were currently using, and this new system that they were demoing. So this got the users really excited, as it should, because they wouldn't have to change any of their processes whatsoever. They would just keep working as they were. But after the software was purchased and after it started to roll out, this turned out to not be the case. And so the integration didn't work after all, and it became this huge roadblock to user adoption. You might hear, this can't help me from users. If you don't see how you work, then you might as well be watching someone do taxes. You know, it's not going to help you in your daily work, unless of course you do taxes for a living. So last year, we were brought in to gather requirements for a client and found out during this that their legal department had seen a demo of some software. Unfortunately, the demo wasn't tailored to them. And so as soon as they were done watching it, they checked it off the list of vendors that they were going to go any further with. You know, they decided they weren't interested in it at all. You know, this was from specifically not having a tailored demo. You know, from our experience working with that software, we know that it's capable in doing what they need. They just didn't see it because the standard demo was given. You might buy software that's incredibly difficult to configure. You know, you're going to have to support this software, and if it's hard to configure and you need the vendor's help to do it, you know, that just doesn't make sense. You know, one of the things that having a custom demo does is it allows your IT folks to request that they see a demo of how the demo was created. They can see how things were done and if it was incredibly difficult for them to do things. You guys are going to want to be able to support this and not be tied to this vendor every time you need to make some sort of change to the configuration. As part of the procurement model here, I have system demonstration, but obviously you're not going to be given that demo to yourself. So we're going to see how we're going to objectively evaluate that. And in order to have a transparent software evaluation, you need to make sure that the system selection is done as objectively as possible. We all know that people have a hard time being objective, but we try to limit this to just the usability and the configuration options, how things look, how things feel whenever you're using it, sort of thing. So how do we do this? By creating some structure around it. And if you don't create structure around it, you get what a ruined beach day like Pam here, and having to try to calculate what these people feel into some number score. And that's pretty much impossible. So by creating a form that gives you a way to score the software, you're able to be as objective as possible. Each line item on that script is demonstrable, and so you can put a score to it as a result. While you're watching the demo, you can, as you're going down the list, you can ask yourself, does this software fully meet the requirement? Is it only met partially, or is it not met at all? And then you put the scores to them using a predetermined list of scores. And following that, the scores are tallied, and then those are added to the overall scoring process. So doing the scoring in this manner, like I mentioned, allows the process to be transparent and defensible. The demo is not how you choose software, but it's an important aspect of the selection. It's like purchasing a car. You can do all the research you want. You can see how much it is, all the bells and whistles and what have you, but you got to get in and see how it works. And that's pretty much what the demo helps you do. All right, so now we've reached the part that everybody wants to see. You've selected the system. You're excited as these kids are. All the due diligence has been completed. The demo evaluations have been tabulated. You can now make an informed decision about this software and know for a fact that it's going to meet your requirements. So what has all this been based on? The users have told you what their requirements were. The users confirmed that you modeled their work processes correctly. So if you've done everything right, all it'll appear is that you've kept score. Even though there's been a whole lot of work done, you're keeping score along the way and involving the users in everything. So Al sums it up pretty nicely here, but it may not be rocket science, but that doesn't mean that it's something that takes zero effort or expertise. It's a pretty common sense process, but common sense isn't all that common, to use a saying that's used quite often. In the ECM market, we see this process not occurring more often than we see it actually occurring. And it's one of the reasons that software projects fail. If we go back through this list that we've kind of made and Albert's going through, what's the common thread? That common thread is the users. And if you go back to where we were at the beginning, you can see why I changed the title of the procurement model to Stakeholder-Centered Procurement Model. This is what it's all about, involving the users. Everything on that list is about the users and how you use what they know to get the right information while bringing them along through the entire process. Engaging the stakeholders early and often, having these conversations about what people do and how they work, making the vendors show you their system in your work, and then evaluating the software are all extremely vital parts and also deeply involve the users. This webinar was about procurement and not about change management, but you can sort of see how important it is that you put change management in all these projects. And luckily for everyone here, the fourth webinar is going to go into more detail on how to manage those changes through these kind of projects. So in this webinar, I've shared a few things that we understand lead to success, and the stories about how we've been why projects struggle. And the foresight needed for success often comes from hindsight being 2020. So let's make sure that we all join Ashley Schilling for the next webinar, as it's very closely tied to this one, since requirements feed directly into implementation. If you're interested in more about these types of projects or other things that we do, please check out our website. There are a lot of good case studies out there to read. I'm not saying that because I wrote some of them, but they are pretty good to give a read to. Now we handing it back to you guys.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Josh. You have some great slides in that presentation, by the way. Anyways, I'd like to ask our audience to stay on. Josh will be back in a few minutes, just after we finish this slide here, to answer your questions. So I do want to tell you about this lineup of webinars that we have coming. On April 28th, you can see Contoral will be with us presenting using native Office 365 to manage, publish, and automatically enforce your records retention schedule. And then they'll be back with us again on May 12th, starting a new 4-part series. So we're looking forward to those. And then Access Sciences will be back with us on May 14th with part 3 in this Hindsight 2020 series. And then again on May 21 with part 4. So next slide, please. We'll be announcing more webinars in the coming weeks, so please refer to our website, mersapient.com, for the most up-to-date listing. And finally, I would like to invite you once again to join us for the MER conference, which will be conducted via a virtual conference experience this year. You can view the full program on our website, merconference.com, as well as on the handout available right here on the GoToWebinar control panel. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Josh, and I want to thank you all for attending. And Josh will address your questions now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm just started thumbing through the questions here. Let's see here. All right, so the first one we got here is, what is the best way to conduct town hall meetings to engage the stakeholders when your company is spread out across multiple locations around the country? Well, a way that we found to do this is much like we're doing now. This isn't a new way to do meetings. So you need to contact these folks, get them on a call, and then just do exactly what you were going to do. Explain more personally, what it is that you're doing with their group. Lay the foundation for what you guys are going to talk about, and then make sure that they have any questions, you answer those. But generally, it's something similar to what we're doing now. Let's see here. Next one. What if we have some groups that don't want to participate in requirements gathering? Oh, some pesky guys. Okay, well, if that occurs, generally what happens is they don't see the value of it, right? They haven't been brought along quite as far as maybe some of the other groups. So what you need to do is you need to find out who they are, what they do in their department, determine what's valuable to them. Is it something that they live and breathe on metrics? Is it ROI, or is some sort of dollars and cents or efficiency? You need to make it directly related to them in order to bring them along with the rest of the organization. So we're at an hour. Is that okay, or we need to cut off?
Yeah, you've got a few more minutes. If you've got more questions to answer, that's fine.
Okay, so next question, is there a magic number for the amount of systems we should evaluate? What is the recommended amount of systems? 2, 5, 10? Well, so that all depends on your tolerance, right? We generally recommend that it's under 5, because these things, they take up some time. You're gonna require an amount of time set aside in your day, usually about a half a day, to look at all these vendors. So when you start getting above 5, 3 or 4 would be the sweet spot. But when you start getting above that, you start running into issues because it's, you just have too many choices at that point. So hopefully the process itself has sort of weeded out and dwindled down the number to where it's more reasonable to have you guys sitting there on the demos. Let's see here. I think that was the last. Oh, wait, there's one more. Nope, that was the right one. Okay, I think that was all of them.
Excellent. Well, great, Josh. Thank you so much for this webinar. This has been excellent. And once again, we want to thank everyone for attending today. So we hope to see you on the next MER Sapient webinar, and we all wish you a very great remainder of your day. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.